Nancy Reagan wasn't just a first lady, she was a force, a protector, a dreamer who turned personal pain into quiet strength. Her life reads like a Hollywood script she might have starred in herself, full of twists, heartaches, and triumphs that remind us how one person's love can echo through history. Born into an era of dramatic change, she navigated early hardships to become a symbol of grace and influence. From her unstable childhood marked by parental separation to her rise as a devoted wife and influential figure in American politics, Nancy's story is one of resilience, ambition, and unwavering loyalty. She often reflected on her journey as a blend of glamour and grit, where personal vulnerability shaped her public poise. Let's explore her world in greater depth, uncovering the layers of the woman who not only shaped her husband's path, but also left an indelible mark on broader cultural, social, and political landscapes, influencing everything from anti-drug campaigns to international diplomacy. Early life and childhood, 1921 to 1929. The early 20th century was a time of dizzying change in America. The Roaring Twenties buzzed with jazz, flappers, and newfound freedoms for women, but the Great Depression soon cast a long shadow, forcing families to scrape by and dream smaller. This era, marked by the aftermath of World War I, saw rapid urbanization, the rise of consumer culture, and significant shifts in social norms. Women, freshly empowered by the 19th Amendment granting them the right to vote in 1920, were beginning to explore careers beyond the home, though societal expectations still weighed heavily on them. The entertainment industry, particularly Broadway, and the burgeoning film scene in Hollywood, offered a glittering escape from everyday drudgery, drawing ambitious souls from all walks of life. It was against this backdrop of optimism, mixed with uncertainty, that many families navigated personal upheavals, including separations and relocations, as economic pressures and personal aspirations clashed. Hollywood shimmered as an escape, a place where stars were born from ordinary lives, symbolizing the American dream in its most glamorous form. Yet for many, it remained just out of reach, a distant beacon amid the realities of hardship. It was into this mix of hope and hardship that Anne Frances Robbins entered the world on July 6, 1921, in New York City, specifically in the Flushing neighborhood of Queens, in a modest, 3-story home on what was then Amity Street, at Sloan Hospital for Women in uptown Manhattan. The hospital, known for its focus on women's health, was a common choice for births in the era, reflecting the growing medical advancements in obstetrics. Her arrival came at a time when New York was a bustling metropolis, alive with immigrants, artists, and entrepreneurs, but also rife with the challenges of post-war recovery. Her parents, Kenneth Robbins, a car salesman struggling to make ends meet after his family's once prosperous farming background in the Midwest, and Edith Luckett, an ambitious actress chasing the spotlight on stage and screen, split soon after her birth. Kenneth, born into a family with roots in Michigan farming, had ventured into sales in hopes of capitalizing on the automobile boom of the 1920s. But his efforts were hampered by economic instability and personal issues. Edith, hailing from a more bohemian lineage with ties to the theater world, her own mother had been involved in vaudeville, saw her marriage as a brief detour from her dreams of stardom. They had met in the whirlwind of New York's social scene, perhaps at a party or through mutual acquaintances in the entertainment circles. But their union was short-lived, strained by differing ambitions and financial woes. The separation was acrimonious. Kenneth faded from Nancy's life entirely for years, leaving her with no contact or support from her biological father during her formative years, which likely instilled a profound sense of abandonment that she carried into adulthood. This absence would later manifest in her fierce protectiveness over her own family and her emphasis on stability, as biographers have noted, shaping her as someone who sought unbreakable bonds to counter early losses. Little Nancy, as she'd later be known, spent her first years shuttled between relatives while her mother pursued roles in traveling theater productions, often performing in vaudeville and early films. Edith's career demanded constant movement, auditions in smoky theaters, rehearsals that stretched into the night, and tours that took her across the Northeast. In those initial months, Nancy might have been cared for by grandparents or other family members in fleeting arrangements, a common practice in an era without modern childcare options. By age 2, she was living with her Aunt Virginia and Uncle Audley Galbraith in Bethesda, Maryland, a stable but emotionally sparse setup in a quiet suburban home where she attended Sidwell Friends School for kindergarten through second grade. Bethesda, a burgeoning suburb just outside Washington, D.C., offered a contrast to the chaos of New York, tree-lined streets, community gatherings, and a sense of order that must have felt both comforting and confining to a toddler separated from her mother. The Galbraiths, with Audley working in a steady government job, possibly in the civil service, as many in the area did, and Virginia managing the household, provided a nurturing environment rooted in Quaker principles, given the school's affiliation. This kinship care arrangement, common in those days, but rarely highlighted in Nancy's public narrative, lasted 6 years and taught her early on about resilience and the ache of separation. It was a period of quiet routines, morning walks to school, simple meals around the family table, and perhaps games in the backyard, but underscored by the underlying longing for her absent parents. Nancy later recalled longing for her mother during those lonely times, finding solace in small joys like visits to New York, when Edith had acting gigs, where she would stay in bustling theater districts and catch glimpses of the stage world. These reunions, though infrequent, were magical for young Nancy. Edith, with her dramatic flair and stories of the limelight, would sweep in like a character from one of her plays, bringing gifts of dolls or dresses and tales of Broadway lights. Imagine a wide-eyed child clutching her mother's hand backstage at a vaudeville show, hearing the applause and smelling the grease paint, moments that ignited Nancy's own interest in performance. Yet these visits were bittersweet, often ending with tearful goodbyes as Edith boarded a train for her next engagement, leaving Nancy to return to the predictability of Bethesda. A little-known detail, young Nancy was nicknamed Punky by her aunt, a playful moniker that contrasted with the instability she faced, and her godmother was the silent film star Alla Nazimova, who introduced an early touch of Hollywood glamour into her life. Nazimova, a Russian-born actress famous for her roles in films like Salome and known for her bohemian lifestyle, was a close friend of Edith's from the theater circuit. Though Nazimova's involvement was more ceremonial than hands-on, her presence symbolized the artistic heritage Nancy inherited, perhaps sending occasional letters or gifts that reminded the girl of a world beyond Maryland's suburbs. This connection to a glamorous figure might have fueled Nancy's dreams, even as she navigated the emotional voids of her daily life. Those years in a quiet suburb, far from the city's hustle, planted seeds of determination. Bethesda in the 1920s was a place of emerging middle-class Americana, new homes sprouting up, community picnics, and a focus on education and morality. At Sidwell Friends, Nancy would have been exposed to a curriculum emphasizing ethics, literature, and basic arts, perhaps participating in simple school plays or reciting poems that honed her expressive skills. She learned to adapt to hold tight to what mattered in an era when women were redefining their roles amid economic turmoil and the looming clouds of world war. The 1920s saw the flapper movement challenging traditional femininity, with women like Edith embodying independence through careers, yet Nancy's experience was one of observation rather than participation. Her Aunt Virginia, a steadfast homemaker, provided a model of quiet strength, teaching Nancy household chores, manners, and the value of routine, lessons that contrasted with her mother's nomadic life. The split childhood, partly poor with her relatives where money was tight but love abundant, partly glimpsing glamour through her mother's world, fostered a duality in her personality, a yearning for security alongside a flair for performance, which would later manifest in her acting career and her role as a protective First Lady. The visits to New York were highlights, immersing Nancy in the theater's magic. Picture a 3-year-old toddling through Times Square, eyes wide at the marquees, or sitting in a dressing room while Edith applied makeup surrounded by costumes and laughter. These moments, though brief, sparked Nancy's imagination, leading her to mimic scenes at home in Bethesda, performing for her aunt and uncle. One anecdote from biographies recalls Nancy reciting lines from her mother's plays, showing an early talent for drama that foreshadowed her Hollywood career. The contrast between the suburbs' calm and the city's energy created an internal tension, teaching her to code switch between worlds, a skill vital in politics. As 1929 approached, the stock market crash loomed. But for Nancy, change came personally when Edith remarried Loyal Davis. This event marked the end of her Maryland chapter, ushering in a new phase in Chicago. The transition was smooth yet transformative, as she left behind the Galbraiths' home for a more affluent setting. In retrospect, these years, from 1921 to 1929, were foundational, blending loss with love, instability with growth. They molded a girl who learned to guard her heart while embracing performance, qualities that defined Nancy Reagan's life. Her childhood, though marked by separation, built a foundation of determination, making her a woman who could stand beside a president with unyielding grace. New family and education, 1929 to 1943. Nancy's childhood took a dramatic turn in 1929 when her mother remarried Loyal Davis, a prominent Chicago neurosurgeon known for his strict discipline, conservative values, and pioneering work in brain surgery. This remarriage came at a pivotal moment in American history, as the stock market crash of October 1929 plunged the nation into the Great Depression, reshaping lives across the country. While millions faced unemployment, breadlines, and economic despair, Edith Luckett's union with Loyal Davis offered a stark contrast, a gateway to stability and affluence for young Nancy. Edith, having pursued her acting career with relentless determination through the 1920s, had met Loyal during one of her theater engagements in Chicago, where he was already establishing himself as a medical powerhouse. Their courtship was swift, blending Edith's theatrical charm with Loyal's methodical precision, and they wed in a modest ceremony that year, marking the end of Nancy's prolonged separation from her mother. Moving to the Windy City, she entered a new family dynamic, affluent, influential, and rigidly structured, a stark contrast to her earlier nomadic existence with relatives in Bethesda, Maryland. Chicago in the late 1920s and early 1930s was a vibrant yet turbulent metropolis known as the Second City for its industrial might, architectural innovation, and cultural scene. Skyscrapers like the Tribune Tower pierced the skyline, symbolizing progress amid the Depression's gloom, while neighborhoods buzzed with immigrants, jazz clubs, and the echoes of Al Capone's gangster era, which was winding down with his imprisonment in 1931. For Nancy, Arriving at age 8, the transition was both exhilarating and intimidating. Gone were the quiet suburban routines of Bethesda. In their place was the hustle of urban life with streetcars clanging along Michigan Avenue and the scent of Lake Michigan's winds carrying hints of industry and opportunity. The Davises lived in an upscale apartment on Lakeview Avenue, surrounded by the intellectual elite. Loyal was not just a doctor, but a professor at Northwestern University, exposing Nancy to a world of academic rigor, social expectations, and high society gatherings that included dinners with medical luminaries and cultural figures. Lakeview Avenue in the affluent Lincoln Park neighborhood was lined with elegant brownstones and apartments overlooking the lake, a far cry from the modest home Nancy had known. The family's residence was tastefully furnished, reflecting Loyal's conservative tastes: dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and a formal dining room where meals were served with precision. Loyal Davis, born in 1896 in Galesburg, Illinois, had risen through sheer intellect and determination, graduating from Northwestern's medical school and becoming a trailblazer in neurosurgery. His work involved delicate operations on the brain and spine, often saving lives in an era when such procedures were risky and innovative. As a professor, he lectured on anatomy and surgical techniques, mentoring students who would go on to shape modern medicine. Nancy, now part of this household, was thrust into a routine of discipline: early mornings for school preparation, evenings dedicated to homework and family discussions, and weekends attending church or cultural events. This environment provided her with stability, but it also came with pressures to conform to her stepfather's exacting standards, which emphasized integrity, hard work, and traditional values. Loyal was a stern patriarch, influenced by his own upbringing in a Methodist family, where moral uprightness was paramount. He expected excellence in all things: perfect table manners, impeccable grades, and a demeanor that reflected well on the family name. Nancy later described him as a man of great principle, but his rigidity could be daunting for a child still healing from earlier instabilities. Edith, with her more free-spirited background, served as a bridge, softening Loyal's edges with her warmth and humor, often recounting theater anecdotes to lighten the atmosphere. Family dinners became forums for intellectual exchange, where Loyal might discuss the latest medical advancements, such as the use of electroencephalography in diagnosing brain disorders, while Edith shared stories from her acting days. Nancy, absorbing it all, began to develop a keen interest in people and their motivations, traits that would serve her well in her future roles. The Depression's impact was muted in their household due to Loyal's secure position, but Nancy was aware of the surrounding hardships. Chicago's streets were filled with soup kitchens and Hoovervilles, makeshift shanty towns named after President Herbert Hoover. Loyal, with his conservative leanings, often spoke of self-reliance and the dangers of government overreach, instilling in Nancy a respect for personal achievement. This period also saw the rise of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal in 1933, which brought relief programs to the city, but Loyal viewed them skeptically, preferring private charity. Nancy, observing these discussions, learned early about politics and economics, though she remained more focused on her personal adjustment. Socially, the Davises moved in elite circles, attending symphony concerts at Orchestra Hall or events at the Art Institute of Chicago, where Nancy was exposed to masterpieces by Monet and Picasso. These outings cultivated her appreciation for culture, blending with her mother's theatrical influence to shape a refined sensibility. Loyal adopted her as a teenager in 1935, and she eagerly took his last name, becoming Nancy Davis, a change that symbolized her quest for belonging after years of feeling like an outsider. The adoption process, formalized in court, was a milestone. At 14, Nancy stood before a judge, affirming her desire to be part of the Davis family. This wasn't merely bureaucratic, it was emotionally liberating, erasing the remnants of her biological father's absence and affirming Loyal's role as her true parent. She later reflected on how it felt like finally having a stable identity, saying in a rare, candid moment, "I waited a long time to be called Nancy Davis, and it meant everything to me." This quote, drawn from her memoir, underscores the psychological weight of the name change. It represented acceptance, security, and a fresh start. In an era when blended families were less common and often stigmatized, this adoption was a bold step, highlighting Loyal's commitment. He treated Nancy as his own, including her in family traditions like summer vacations to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where they fished and hiked, fostering bonds through shared experiences. This adoption wasn't just legal, it reshaped her identity, giving her the poise, connections, and even a touch of privilege that would propel her forward. With the Davis name came access to Chicago's upper echelons, invitations to galas, introductions to influential figures, and a sense of entitlement tempered by Loyal's emphasis on merit. However, it came with challenges. Loyal was demanding, instilling a sense of perfectionism that Nancy carried into adulthood, often masking her insecurities with a composed exterior that some perceived as aloofness. Psychologically, this period helped her develop a steel spine, as friends later described, enabling her to navigate future public scrutiny. Experts in child psychology might note that such an upbringing, blending affection with high expectations, fostered resilience, but also anxiety about failure. Nancy internalized Loyal's values, conservatism, discipline, and loyalty, which mirrored those she later shared with Ronald Reagan. Edith, meanwhile, continued her social engagements, hosting teas where Nancy learned etiquette, from proper curtsies to engaging conversation, skills vital for her future as First Lady. High school at the prestigious Girls Latin School of Chicago honed her sharp mind and social skills. She excelled in drama and English, participating in school plays that foreshadowed her future career, such as leading roles in theatrical productions where she displayed a natural talent for emotive performances. Founded in 1888, the Girls Latin School was an elite all-girls institution emphasizing classical education, Latin, Greek, literature, and the arts in a Gothic-style building on East Scott Street. Nancy enrolled around 1933 at age 12, commuting daily and immersing herself in a curriculum designed to produce well-rounded intellectual women. Her drama classes under inspiring teachers allowed her to channel her emotions. She starred in productions like Shakespeare's As You Like It, memorizing lines with ease, and earning applause for her poise on stage. English courses sparked her love of writing and rhetoric, where she penned essays on historical figures, honing arguments that later aided her advocacy work. An overlooked aspect. Nancy was an avid reader, devouring books on history and biography, which fueled her lifelong curiosity about people and power, often spending quiet evenings in the family library absorbing stories of influential figures like Abraham Lincoln. The Davis home boasted a well-stocked library with volumes on American history, medical texts, and classics like Jane Austen and Charles Dickens. Nancy would curl up in a leather armchair, losing herself in Lincoln's biographies, drawn to his rise from humble beginnings, a parallel to her own journey. This habit not only expanded her knowledge but also provided escape during adolescent uncertainties, such as navigating peer relationships in a school of privileged girls. Socially, she formed friendships with classmates from similar backgrounds, attending dances and tea parties, but her perfectionism sometimes made her seem reserved. The 1930s saw Chicago's cultural scene thrive despite the Depression. The World's Fair in 1933, a century of progress, dazzled with exhibits on science and innovation, which Nancy visited, marveling at pavilions showcasing future technologies like television. By 1939, she enrolled at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, majoring in drama, a choice influenced by her mother's acting world and her own growing passion for the stage. Smith, one of the Seven Sisters colleges, was a bastion of women's education founded in 1871 to provide Ivy League equivalent opportunities for women. Nancy arrived amid the outbreak of World War II in Europe, with campus abuzz about global events. Her decision to major in drama stemmed from high school successes and Edith's encouragement, who visited often, sharing tips from her career. College life was formative. She joined the drama club, performed in productions like The Importance of Being Earnest, where she shone in comedic roles as Lady Bracknell, earning reviews in the college paper for her timing and expression. Rehearsals involved late nights in the theater, collaborating with peers on sets and costumes, fostering teamwork and creativity. She navigated the social scene amid World War II's onset, including volunteering for war efforts and forming lasting friendships with classmates who admired her determination. As the U.S. entered the war in 1941, Smith mobilized. Students knit socks for soldiers, participated in bond drives, and attended lectures on international affairs. Nancy, influenced by Loyal's conservatism, supported the war effort patriotically, perhaps writing letters to servicemen or organizing campus events. Her social life included teas, dances with nearby men's colleges like Amherst, and sorority-like houses where she lived, building networks that endured. Academically, she balanced drama with courses in literature, history, and psychology, graduating in 1943 with a bachelor's degree amid wartime austerity. Her commencement featured speeches on women's roles in the post-war world. Ready to chase the stage lights her mother had known so well, armed with a blend of Midwestern practicality, East Coast Polish, and an emerging sense of ambition that would carry her to Hollywood, Nancy left Smith transformed, her education a cornerstone of her multifaceted life. Acting career, 1943 to 1962. Fresh from college, Nancy's acting career kicked off modestly in the post-war entertainment boom, aided by her mother's theater connections, including stars like Zasu Pitts, Walter Houston, and Spencer Tracy. The year 1943 marked a significant transition for Nancy Davis, as she graduated from Smith College amid the height of World War II, a time when the American entertainment industry was undergoing profound changes. With many male actors serving in the military, opportunities for women in theater and film were expanding, albeit within the constraints of a male-dominated field. The post-war boom, which would fully erupt after 1945, saw a surge in demand for escapist entertainment, musicals, dramas, and light-hearted fare that helped a nation heal from the traumas of global conflict. Nancy, armed with her drama degree and a passion ignited during her high school and college performances, stepped into this evolving landscape with determination. Her mother, Edith Luckett Davis, played a pivotal role in launching her career. Edith, a seasoned actress with roots in vaudeville and early films, had cultivated a network of influential contacts over the years. Figures like Zasu Pitts, known for her quirky comedic roles in silent films and talkies, Walter Houston, the Oscar-winning patriarch of a Hollywood dynasty, and Spencer Tracy, the versatile star of MGM classics, were part of Edith's circle. These connections weren't just names dropped in conversation, they provided practical assistance, such as recommendations for auditions or introductions to producers. For Nancy, this maternal support was a double-edged sword. It opened doors, but also created expectations, as she strived to prove her talent independently. She started with summer stock theater in New England, honing her craft in regional productions that involved grueling rehearsals and modest pay, then moved to touring shows and a Broadway debut in 1946 with Lute Song, starring alongside Yul Brynner and Mary Martin, a role her mother helped secure through connections, where she played Si Chun, a lady-in-waiting, earning praise for her graceful presence. Despite the producer's casual remark, "You look like you could be Chinese," highlighting the era's casual typecasting. Summer stock, a staple of American theater in the 1940s, was essentially a boot camp for aspiring actors. Nancy began in venues like the Cape Playhouse in Dennis, Massachusetts, or the Ogunquit Playhouse in Maine, rustic theaters where performers lived in communal housing, rehearsed from dawn to dusk, and performed nightly for audiences seeking respite from wartime rationing and newsreels. These productions often featured classic plays or light comedies, requiring versatility. Nancy might play an ingenue one week and a supporting character the next. The pay was meager, perhaps $50 a week, covering board and minimal expenses, but the experience was invaluable. She learned to memorize lines quickly, adapt to different directors' styles, and endure the physical demands of stage work, from costume changes in sweltering heat to projecting her voice without microphones. This grind built her resilience, a trait that would later define her public life. From summer stock, Nancy progressed to touring shows, crisscrossing the country in productions that brought Broadway hits to regional audiences. These tours were exhausting, long bus rides, dingy hotels, and performances in varying venues, but they sharpened her skills and exposed her to diverse crowds. By 1945, as the war ended and soldiers returned home, the theater scene revitalized, setting the stage for her Broadway breakthrough. In 1946, she landed a role in Lute Song, a musical adaptation of the ancient Chinese play Pipa Ji, directed by John Houseman, and featuring music by Raymond Scott with lyrics by Bernard Hannigan. The show, which opened at the Plymouth Theater on February 6, 1946, starred Mary Martin as the lead, Chow Eun-young, a devoted wife enduring trials, and Yul Brynner in his Broadway debut as her husband, Tsai Yong. Nancy portrayed Si Chun, a lady-in-waiting in the imperial court, a supporting role that required elegance and subtlety. Her mother, Edith, was instrumental in securing the audition. Leveraging her friendship with Mary Martin and producer Michael Meyerberg, she arranged for Nancy to read for the part. The producer's offhand comment, "You look like you could be Chinese," reflected the era's lax approach to ethnic casting, common in Hollywood and Broadway, where white actors often played Asian characters with minimal makeup or authenticity. Despite this, Nancy's performance was well received. Critics like Brooks Atkinson of the New York Times noted the cast's grace, and Nancy earned mentions for her poise in ensemble scenes. The show ran for 142 performances, a modest success, but it marked Nancy's entry into the big leagues, teaching her about the glamour and grind of Broadway, late-night rehearsals, opening night jitters, and the thrill of curtain calls. Overlooked in many accounts is how Edith Luckett orchestrated much of Nancy's early opportunities, leveraging her own industry ties to get her daughter auditions and small parts, reflecting a mother-daughter dynamic blending support and control, though it sometimes led to tensions as Nancy sought independence. Edith's role was more than maternal encouragement. She acted as an unofficial agent, making calls to old friends and arranging meetings. For instance, through her connections, Nancy secured bit parts in touring reviews or radio dramas, building her resume incrementally. This support was invaluable in an industry where nepotism often opened doors, but it also created friction. Nancy, eager to forge her own path, occasionally resented the implication that her success was handed to her. In interviews later in life, she acknowledged Edith's help, but emphasized her own hard work, saying, "Mother opened the door, but I had to walk through it." This dynamic mirrored many parent-child relationships in show business, where guidance could feel like interference. As Nancy gained confidence, she began seeking roles on her own, balancing gratitude with a desire for autonomy, a theme that echoed in her later life as she supported Ronald Reagan's career while maintaining her influence. Hollywood called in 1949 with a 7-year contract from MGM Studios, where she adopted the screen name Nancy Davis and described the experience as like walking into a dream world. By the late 1940s, Hollywood was in its golden age twilight, transitioning from wartime propaganda films to post-war realism and musicals. MGM, the Tiffany of studios under Louis B. Mayer, was known for lavish productions and a stable of stars like Judy Garland, Clark Gable, and Elizabeth Taylor. Nancy's entry came after a successful screen test arranged through her Broadway visibility and Edith's lingering contacts. Signing the contract in March 1949, she joined the ranks of contract players, young talents groomed for stardom with weekly salaries, acting lessons, and publicity pushes. The studio lot in Culver City was a self-contained universe, sound stages buzzing with activity, commissaries where stars dined, and wardrobe departments crafting glamour. Nancy's screen name remained Nancy Davis, a nod to her adopted identity, and she often spoke of the initial awe, walking past sets for The Wizard of Oz remakes or glimpsing legends like Katharine Hepburn. However, the dream had realities: long hours, typecasting, and the pressure to conform to MGM's image of wholesome femininity. She starred in films like The Doctor and the Girl, 1949, playing a supportive wife opposite Glenn Ford in a medical drama that explored ethical dilemmas, and East Side, West Side, 1949, sharing scenes with Ava Gardner and James Mason in a tale of high society intrigue. The Doctor and the Girl, directed by Curtis Bernhardt, was Nancy's debut, based on a Maxence Vandermeersch novel. She portrayed Mariette, the devoted wife of Dr. Michael Corday, Glenn Ford, who grapples with his father's elitism and his own moral choices in treating the poor. The film, shot in black and white, highlighted themes of class and compassion, with Nancy's role emphasizing loyalty, a motif in her career. Critics praised the chemistry between Ford and Nancy, noting her natural warmth. Released in September 1949, it was a modest hit, grossing over $1 million. Following quickly was East Side, West Side, a glossy melodrama directed by Mervyn LeRoy, adapted from Marcia Davenport's novel. Nancy played Helen Lee, a friend of the central couple, Barbara Stanwyck and James Mason, navigating adultery and scandal in New York's upper crust. Sharing the screen with Ava Gardner as the seductive rival, Nancy held her own in ensemble scenes, her poise shining in party sequences. The film, with its lavish sets and costumes, exemplified MGM's style. Though reviews were mixed, Variety called it soapy but entertaining. These early roles established Nancy as reliable support, often the moral compass in turbulent stories. Often cast as the wholesome girl next door, loyal, demure, and morally upright, her roles mirrored her personal values but limited her range, competing with contemporaries like Jane Powell and Debbie Reynolds for similar parts. In the studio system, actors were typed based on looks and persona. Nancy's patrician features and refined demeanor made her ideal for nice girl characters, wives, nurses, or friends who provided stability. This typecasting was common for women in 1950s Hollywood, where leading ladies like Audrey Hepburn embodied elegance, but supporting actresses like Nancy filled niches. She vied with Powell, known for musicals like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and Reynolds, the perky ingenue in Singin' in the Rain, for roles requiring charm without edge. Nancy embraced it, saying in a 1950 interview, "I play the kind of girl I'd like to be, but privately chafed at the limitations, seeking more dramatic depth." A little-known wrinkle: to seem younger and more marketable, she shaved 2 years off her age, listing her birth as 1923, a common trick in Tinseltown that later sparked confusion in records and biographies. This practice was widespread. Stars like Lana Turner and Joan Crawford did similar to extend their ingenue phase. Nancy's adjustment helped secure youthful roles, but it led to discrepancies in later profiles, with some sources still listing 1923 until corrected. She appeared in 11 movies total, including the sci-fi thriller Donovan's Brain, 1953, where she portrayed a more complex character dealing with ethical dilemmas in a story of mind control, a rare departure from typecasting that critics like Bosley Crowther called convincing, and The Next Voice You Hear, 1950, her favorite, where she played a pregnant housewife hearing God's voice over the radio, a role that resonated with her spiritual side. Donovan's Brain, based on Kurt Siodmak's novel and directed by Felix E. Feist, was a B-movie gem. Nancy played Janice Donovan, the wife of a scientist, Lou Ayres, who keeps a tycoon's brain alive, leading to possession and madness. Her performance conveyed fear and determination, a step up from supportive wives. Crowther in the New York Times lauded her as convincing in her terror. The Next Voice You Hear, directed by William A. Wellman and produced by Dor Sherry, was an inspirational drama where God's voice broadcasts globally. Nancy as Mary Smith, an expectant mother facing everyday struggles, brought authenticity. She called it her favorite for its message of faith. Other films included Shadow on the Wall, 1950, a noir where she played a psychiatrist treating a traumatized child, Anne Sothern's Daughter, Night into Morning, 1951, with Ray Milland as a suicidal professor she helps heal. It's a Big Country, 1951, an anthology with her in a segment on diversity, Talk About a Stranger, 1952, a mystery with George Murphy, Shadow in the Sky, 1952, a drama about mental illness and Crash Landing, 1958, her post-marriage return as a wife in a plane crash thriller. Her final film, Hellcats of the Navy, 1957, co-starred her future husband, Ronald Reagan, in a naval drama that blended romance and action, prophetic of their real-life partnership, with on-set chemistry that foreshadowed their enduring bond. Directed by Nathan Duran, this Columbia Pictures release featured Ronald as a submarine commander and Nancy as Nurse Helen Blair, his love interest. Filmed on location with Navy cooperation, it included tense underwater scenes and patriotic themes. Their chemistry was evident. Ronald later joked it was our first collaboration, hinting at their 1952 marriage. The film, though not a blockbuster, was a personal milestone. Nancy also ventured into television, guest starring on shows like Schlitz Playhouse of Stars and General Electric Theater, hosted by Ronald, where she appeared in dramatic episodes that showcased her versatility. TV in the 1950s was exploding, with anthology series offering varied roles. On Schlitz Playhouse, 1953 to 1954, she featured in episodes like The Human Touch, playing a nurse. General Electric Theater, 1954 to 1962, Ronald's platform saw her in The Long Way Round, 1956, and others blending domesticity with drama. Other appearances included Zane Grey Theater, 1958, and The Tall Man, 1961, totaling over a dozen episodes. These gigs provided steady work as film roles waned. By 1962, she'd retired from acting to focus on family, a choice that spoke volumes about her priorities, though she later declined a role in the 1996 film Mother to care for Ronald during his illness. With children Patty, 1952, and Ron Jr., 1958, plus stepchildren Maureen and Michael, Nancy chose homemaking over Hollywood, supporting Ronald's political shift. In 1996, offered a part in Mother, she turned it down amid Ronald's Alzheimer's, prioritizing caregiving, a decision reflecting her devotion. Though not a blockbuster star, her career provided financial independence and honed her public poise, skills that served her well in politics. Earning $1,000 weekly at MGM, she gained autonomy. The poise from facing cameras translated to White House grace under pressure, meeting and marriage to Ronald Reagan, 1949 to 1952. Fate intervened in late 1949 amid the Red Scare, when Nancy's name landed on a Hollywood blacklist mistaken for another woman with communist ties. This period, often referred to as the McCarthy era, named after Senator Joseph McCarthy, though his most infamous activities peaked in the early 1950s, was a time of intense paranoia in the United States. The Cold War had begun, pitting the capitalist West against the communist East, and fears of Soviet infiltration permeated American society. In Hollywood, this manifested through the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, which investigated alleged communist sympathies in the film industry. The infamous Hollywood 10 screenwriters and directors who refused to testify were jailed, and a blacklist emerged, effectively barring suspected individuals from work. Studios eager to avoid government scrutiny and public boycotts enforced it rigorously, leading to ruined careers and lives. For actors like Nancy Davis, who had just signed a promising contract with MGM, being blacklisted was a career death sentence. The mistake stemmed from a simple case of mistaken identity. Another Nancy Davis, involved in leftist groups, had signed petitions that raised red flags. Our Nancy, with her conservative upbringing under stepfather Loyal Davis, had no such affiliations. Yet the error appeared in publications like The Hollywood Reporter, listing her among suspects. Terrified of career ruin, she had worked hard to build her film resume, starring in roles that showcased her wholesome image. She sought help from Ronald Reagan, then president of the Screen Actors Guild, SAG. Ronald Reagan, or Ronnie as Nancy would affectionately call him, was a rising figure in Hollywood politics. Elected SAG president in 1947, he navigated the Guild through turbulent times, balancing anti-communist efforts with protecting members' rights. His own background made him a staunch anti-communist. Raised in Illinois by a struggling family with an alcoholic father and a devoutly religious mother, Reagan had entered Hollywood in the 1930s, starring in films like Knute Rockin' All-American, 1940, where his line, "Win one for the Gipper," became iconic. By 1949, he was divorced from actress Jane Wyman, a painful split finalized in 1948 after 8 years of marriage. Wyman, an Oscar winner for Johnny Belinda, 1948, cited Reagan's growing involvement in politics and Seiji as straining their relationship. He was often absent, consumed by union duties. The divorce left Reagan heartbroken and cautious, having lost significant custody time with his children, Maureen, born 1941, and adopted son Michael, born 1945. He vowed never to remarry hastily, focusing instead on his career and anti-communist advocacy, including testifying before HUAC as a friendly witness. It was in this context that Nancy approached him. A hidden detail. Nancy took the initiative, prompted by her director Mervyn LeRoy, who arranged the meeting. She feigned extra concern to extend their discussion into a date at Chasen's restaurant, a popular Hollywood spot where they talked late into the night. Mervyn LeRoy, a veteran director known for classics like The Wizard of Oz, 1939, and Quo Vadis, 1951, had worked with Nancy on East Side, West Side, 1949, and recognized her distress over the blacklist rumor. Sympathetic, he contacted Reagan, leveraging their mutual saggy connections. Nancy, ever resourceful, amplified her worries during the call to Reagan's office, ensuring a personal meeting rather than a delegated resolution. Their first encounter was set for November 15th, 1949, at Chasen's, a legendary eatery on Beverly Boulevard, frequented by stars like Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. The restaurant, with its dark wood panels, red leather booths, and menu featuring chili and steaks, was a hub for industry deals and romances. What began as a business dinner, Reagan assuring her Seiji could vouch for her innocence and issue a statement, evolved into something more. They discussed politics, films, and personal lives. Reagan, charming and articulate, shared his anti-communist views while Nancy's poise and intelligence captivated him. The conversation stretched past midnight, with Reagan walking her to her car, a spark ignited despite his reservations. Their first meeting was meant to be business, a dinner to clear her name, but sparks flew despite Ronald's recent divorce from Jane Wyman, which had left him heartbroken and cautious, having lost custody time with his children and vowing never to remarry hastily. Wyman's departure had been public and painful. Tabloids speculated on affairs, but the core issue was incompatibility, her career soaring while his stagnated, compounded by his SAG obsession. Reagan, in his autobiography, Where's the Rest of Me, 1965, described the divorce as a shattering blow, leaving him distrustful of love. Yet Nancy's genuine concern and shared values, both came from Midwestern roots, valued family, and abhorred communism, drew him in. He later admitted to friends that her quiet strength reminded him of his mother, Nell Reagan, a pillar of faith and resilience. For Nancy, Reagan represented stability and kindness, qualities absent in her early life. Their initial interactions were tentative. Reagan, still healing, kept things platonic, but Nancy's persistence, inviting him to events or casual meetups, gradually broke down his walls. Ronnie, fresh from that painful split, was wary of commitment, but Nancy's warmth drew him in. They dated quietly for nearly 3 years, popping corn and watching TV in her apartment, away from the party scene, with gossip columns dubbing them the romance of a couple who have no vices. This low-key courtship contrasted with Hollywood's hedonistic culture of the 1950s, where stars like Marilyn Monroe and Frank Sinatra dominated headlines with scandalous affairs. Reagan and Nancy preferred simple evenings. Her modest apartment in West Hollywood became their haven, where they'd make popcorn on the stove, tune into shows like I Love Lucy, premiering in 1951, or discuss current events. Reagan, an avid reader, shared books on history and politics, while Nancy introduced him to lighter fare from her acting world. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, the era's tabloid queens, caught wind but portrayed them positively. Hopper called them the clean-cut couple, noting their avoidance of nightclubs and excess. This image aligned with their values. Both were teetotalers, influenced by Reagan's father's alcoholism and Nancy's disciplined upbringing. Their dates often involved drives along the Pacific Coast Highway, stopping at diners for burgers or attending church services. Reagan was a Presbyterian, Nancy Episcopalian, but they found common spiritual ground. Nancy later shared an emotional insight. "I don't know if it was exactly love at first sight, but it was pretty close." This quote from her memoir, My Turn, 1989, captures the gradual yet profound connection. Early on, they bonded over shared experiences. Both had absent fathers. Reagan's was alcoholic and unreliable, strong mothers, and Hollywood ambitions tempered by reality. Reagan confided in Nancy about his divorce pains, including the guilt over limited time with Maureen and Michael, who lived primarily with Wyman. Nancy, empathetic from her own childhood separations, offered support without pressure. A rarely mentioned challenge. Ronald was recovering from a broken leg from a charity baseball game, hobbling on crutches during early dates, adding a layer of vulnerability to their budding romance as Nancy helped him navigate stairs and events. The injury occurred in July 1949 during a game benefiting the Motion Picture Relief Fund. Reagan, an avid sportsman, fractured his thigh sliding into base. Hospitalized for weeks, he emerged on crutches just as their courtship began. Nancy's assistance, holding his arm at dinners or steadying him at premieres, fostered intimacy, turning a handicap into a bonding opportunity. Reagan later joked it made him depend on her from the start. As months turned to years, their relationship deepened amid Hollywood's evolving landscape. The 1950s saw the decline of the studio system, with television rising and antitrust rulings breaking monopolies. Reagan's SAG role intensified. He led negotiations for residuals in TV reruns, a landmark achievement. Nancy supported him quietly, attending guild meetings and offering advice, foreshadowing her White House influence. Yet Reagan's caution persisted, haunted by his father's failures and his own emotional guardedness. He hesitated on marriage. Press speculation mounted, with columns like Sheila Graham's hinting at engagement, pressuring the couple. Nancy, sensing stagnation, subtly pushed by, hinting at moving to New York for Broadway work, a ploy that spurred Ronald to propose, overcoming his fears, rooted in his alcoholic father's influence and his own emotional distance. The proposal came in early 1952, perhaps over a quiet dinner, with Reagan presenting a modest diamond ring. He later wrote in letters, compiled in I Love You, Ronnie, 2000, how Nancy saved him from loneliness. Their wedding on March 4th, 1952, was intimate, no fanfare, just them and two witnesses, William Holden and his wife Artie's, at the Little Brown Church in the San Fernando Valley, a simple ceremony that reflected their preference for privacy over Hollywood extravagance. The Little Brown Church, a quaint wooden structure built in 1874 on Coldwater Canyon Avenue, was a popular spot for discreet celebrity weddings, known for its non-denominational services and serene setting amid orange groves. Reagan and Nancy chose it for its simplicity, avoiding the paparazzi-plagued venues like Beverly Hills churches. The ceremony, officiated by Reverend John Wells, lasted mere minutes. Vows exchanged under stained glass windows, with no guests, photographers, or reception. Holden, Reagan's best friend and co-star in Brother Rat, 1938, and Artie's Brenda Marshall served as witnesses, signing the certificate with joy. Nancy wore a simple gray wool suit with a white collar, a practical choice from Bullock's Wilshire department store, accessorized with a small hat and veil, elegant yet understated, symbolizing her no-nonsense style. She preserved the outfit and even the plastic bride and groom toppers from their small cake as cherished mementos, later displaying them in their home as reminders of that day. A whispered controversy. Their daughter Patty was born 7 months later on October 21st, 1952, sparking rumors of a premarital pregnancy, though Nancy insisted it was premature, a situation that tested her composure early in marriage. Patty's arrival at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital weighed in at a healthy 6 pounds. But the timing fueled tabloid whispers. Hopper hinted coyly in her column. Nancy, in my turn, addressed it directly, explaining Patty was born early due to complications. But the era's moral standards amplified the gossip. This tested Nancy's resilience. She focused on motherhood, navigating the joys and challenges of a blended family while supporting Reagan's career. The rumors faded, but they underscored the scrutiny public figures faced. This union marked Nancy's first and only marriage, Ronald's second, blending their lives in ways that would redefine American politics, with Nancy viewing Ronald as her life's true beginning, often saying, "My life really began when I married my husband." For Nancy at 30, it was a culmination of her search for belonging. For Reagan, 41, it was redemption after heartbreak. They honeymooned briefly in Phoenix, Arizona, at a ranch owned by Loyal Davis, before settling in Pacific Palisades. Their marriage, built on mutual respect and shared dreams, evolved into one of history's great political partnerships. Nancy became Reagan's confidant, advisor, and protector, influencing his shift from actor to governor to president. From 1949 to 1952, what started as a blacklist scare blossomed into enduring love, setting the stage for their legacy. Family life brought joys and challenges in the sunny suburbs of Pacific Palisades, where the Reagans settled into a ranch-style home overlooking the ocean, complete with a pool and stables for horseback riding. Ronald had 2 children from his first marriage, Maureen, born 1941, and adopted son Michael, born 1945, whom Nancy embraced, though blending families proved tricky with lingering tensions from the divorce, including occasional custody disputes and emotional adjustments for the children. Together, they welcomed Patty in October 1952 and Ron Jr. in May 1958, creating a bustling household filled with horseback rides, family dinners, and Ronald's storytelling, where he would regale them with tales from his acting days or Midwestern upbringing. But strains emerged. Patty later wrote of feeling distant from her mother, a rift that deepened over years due to Nancy's intense focus on Ronald, often prioritizing his needs amid his busy schedule. Rarely discussed family dynamics. The Reagans idealized the nuclear family publicly, but privately, Ronald's absenteeism from acting and politics left Nancy as the primary disciplinarian, leading to perceptions of her as controlling, with strict rules on manners and appearance that sometimes clashed with the children's rebellious spirits. Maureen battled cancer young, forging a bond with Nancy through hospital visits and emotional support, while Michael felt overshadowed and later wrote about feeling like an outsider. An untold anecdote, Nancy quietly supported Maureen's independence, helping her navigate Hollywood without favoritism by introducing her to agents discreetly, showing a nurturing side beneath her protective exterior. As Ronald shifted to politics, speaking for General Electric and conservatism, Nancy managed the home front, hosting gatherings that honed her hostess skills, such as intimate dinners with influential figures, where she practiced the art of subtle persuasion. These years solidified their partnership, with Nancy as Ronald's emotional anchor amid his growing ambitions, often describing their family as a sanctuary despite the underlying tensions that would surface later. First Lady of California, 1967 to 1975, When Ronald won California's governorship in 1966, Nancy became First Lady of the state in January 1967, relocating to the governor's mansion in Sacramento. A Victorian home she found outdated and eerie, prompting a move to a leased house in the suburbs for a more modern, secure environment. This transition marked a significant shift in Nancy Reagan's life, thrusting her into the public eye in a role she had not initially sought, but would come to embrace with a mix of reluctance and determination. Ronald Reagan's victory in the 1966 gubernatorial election was a landmark event in California politics, defeating incumbent Democrat Pat Brown by nearly 1 million votes in a state grappling with social unrest, economic challenges, and the escalating Vietnam War. Reagan, a former actor turned conservative spokesman, campaigned on themes of law and order, fiscal responsibility, and opposition to campus protests at places like UC Berkeley, where the free speech movement had ignited national debates. His win symbolized the rising tide of conservatism in a traditionally liberal state. And for Nancy, it meant leaving behind the relative privacy of their Pacific Palisades home for the fishbowl of state leadership. The governor's mansion, located at 1526 H Street in Sacramento, was a grand but aging Victorian structure built in 1877, complete with ornate woodwork, high ceilings, and a history of housing California's leaders since 1903. Nancy, with her keen eye for aesthetics honed from her Hollywood days and Chicago upbringing, found it not only outdated, with its creaky floors, drafty rooms, and antique furnishings, but also eerie, perhaps due to its empty, echoing halls and rumors of past hauntings or simply the weight of its historical significance. She described it in later interviews as feeling like a fire trap, unsafe for their family, especially with young Ron Jr. at home. Security concerns were paramount. The mansion lacked modern protections, and in an era of political turbulence, including the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy in 1968, the Reagans prioritized safety. By 1968, they moved to a leased suburban home in the affluent Arden Park neighborhood, a ranch-style house at 1341 45th Street, rented for $1,250 a month from friends. This modern abode offered better security, a swimming pool, and proximity to the state capitol, allowing Nancy to create a more comfortable family environment while fulfilling her duties. The move drew minor criticism from those who saw it as extravagant, but Nancy defended it as practical, noting the mansion's unsuitability for daily living. This decision reflected her protective instincts, a theme that would recur throughout her public life. She dove into causes like visiting wounded Vietnam veterans at hospitals, where she listened to their stories and advocated for better care, a role that humanized her amid anti-war protests, often bringing gifts and spending hours at bedsides to offer comfort in a divided era. The Vietnam War, raging from 1955 to 1975, deeply divided America, with California's large military presence, bases like Camp Pendleton and Travis Air Force Base, making the state a focal point for both support and opposition. By 1967, protests were rampant, from San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury hippie movement to violent clashes at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968. Ronald, as governor, took a hard line against demonstrators, famously calling them cowardly little fascist bands, but Nancy chose a softer approach, focusing on the human cost of the war. Her visits to veterans' hospitals such as the VA facility in Palo Alto or Letterman Army Hospital in San Francisco became a signature initiative. Dressed in elegant yet approachable attire, simple dresses with pearls. She would arrive unannounced, bearing small gifts like books, cigarettes, or homemade cookies baked with her children. These gestures were personal. Nancy spent hours at bedsides holding hands with injured soldiers, many in their early 20s, listening to tales of jungle ambushes, lost comrades, and dreams deferred. One veteran later recalled her wiping tears during a story of a lost limb, saying, "She made me feel seen, not just pitied." This humanized Nancy, countering perceptions of her as aloof, and positioned her as a compassionate figure amid the anti-war fervor. Critics of the war accused the Reagans of hypocrisy, but Nancy's advocacy for better VA funding and mental health support for vets showed genuine empathy, influenced perhaps by her stepfather's medical background. These visits, often weekly, totaled hundreds over her tenure, laying the groundwork for her later national efforts on behalf of military families. Championing the foster grandparents program became her passion. After observing seniors mentoring disabled children during a 1967 visit to an Oakland facility, she promoted it statewide, pairing elderly volunteers with needy kids for mutual support, expanding it to include tutoring sessions and emotional bonding activities that provided purpose to retirees and stability to youth. The Foster Grandparents Program, part of President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society initiatives launched in 1965 under the Older Americans Act, aimed to combat poverty and isolation by connecting low-income seniors with at-risk children. Nancy's involvement began serendipitously during a routine tour of community programs in Oakland, a city then facing urban decay, racial tensions following the Watts riots of 1965, and high child poverty rates. At a local center, she witnessed elderly volunteers, many in their 70s and 80s from diverse backgrounds, including African American and Hispanic retirees, engaging with disabled or disadvantaged kids through games, reading, and crafts. One scene particularly moved her: a grandmotherly figure helping a child with cerebral palsy paint, fostering smiles and confidence. Touched by the mutual benefits, the seniors gaining purpose, the children receiving affection, Nancy declared it love in action and vowed to expand it. As First Lady, she had no formal budget but used her platform masterfully, lobbying the state legislature for funding and partnering with federal agencies like Action, now AmeriCorps Seniors. Under her guidance, the program grew from a handful of sites to dozens across California, recruiting thousands of volunteers through church groups, senior centers, and media appeals. She expanded it beyond basic mentoring to include structured tutoring in reading and math, emotional support for foster kids, and even art therapy sessions, adapting to California's diverse needs from inner-city Los Angeles to rural Central Valley towns. This initiative not only addressed intergenerational isolation but also aligned with Reagan's conservative ethos of community-based solutions over big government, though it drew from federal roots. An untold story, Nancy personally recruited participants, visiting nursing homes and schools, and even co-authored a book, To Love a Child, with Jane Wilkie, accompanied by a song of the same name by Hal David and Joe Raposo, which she used in promotional events to raise awareness. Nancy's hands-on approach was remarkable. She didn't just endorse from afar, but rolled up her sleeves. In 1968, she toured nursing homes in San Diego and Fresno, chatting with residents about their lives, widows sharing recipes, veterans recounting war stories, and convincing them to volunteer, often saying, "You have so much wisdom to give." At schools for disabled children like those in the Los Angeles Unified District, she observed classes and matched kids with grandparents, creating lasting pairs. One poignant anecdote: in a Sacramento orphanage, she paired an 80-year-old former teacher with a blind boy, leading to weekly reading sessions that improved his literacy. To amplify visibility, Nancy co-authored To Love a Child in 1972 with Jane Wilkie, a program administrator. The book detailed success stories, practical guides for volunteers, and Nancy's personal reflections on aging and youth. Published by Bobbs Merrill, it sold modestly but raised funds through royalties donated back to the program. Complementing it was the song To Love a Child, written by lyricist Hal David of Raindrops Keep Fallin' on My Head fame, and composer Joe Raposo, Sesame Street tunesmith, a gentle ballad emphasizing intergenerational love. Nancy premiered it at fundraisers, sometimes singing along with performers, turning events into heartfelt galas attended by celebrities like Bob Hope. These efforts boosted enrollment by 50% statewide, making California a model for the national program. She also focused on POW/WMIA families, writing newspaper columns and donating her salary to their league, highlighting her empathy for military sacrifices by organizing bracelet campaigns and letter-writing drives to bring attention to missing soldiers. The POW/MIA issue was acute during the Vietnam, with over 2,500 Americans unaccounted for by war's end. California's large veteran population amplified the pain. Families endured uncertainty, lobbying for information from Hanoi. Nancy, moved by veterans' visits, became a vocal advocate. She wrote syndicated columns for newspapers like the Los Angeles Times, sharing stories of wives waiting for husbands or mothers for sons, urging readers to pressure Washington. Her $5,000 annual salary as First Lady, modest but symbolic, was donated entirely to the National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia, founded in 1970. Nancy organized bracelet campaigns where engraved metal bands bearing a POW's name were sold for $2.50, raising awareness and funds. She wore one herself for Lieutenant Commander John McCain, later a senator. Letter-writing drives targeted Congress and President Nixon, with Nancy hosting teas where families drafted pleas. These behind-the-scenes efforts humanized the issue, bridging conservative support for the war with compassion for its victims. Critics accused the Reagans of prolonging the conflict through hardline policies. But Nancy's work transcended politics, focusing on humanity. These efforts, often behind the scenes, laid groundwork for her national advocacy, though critics noted her initial reluctance to embrace the public role stemming from her preference for privacy and fear of media scrutiny. Nancy entered the role wary. Hollywood had taught her about invasive press, and as a private person, she preferred supporting Ronald quietly. Early profiles portrayed her as glamorous but distant, critiquing her designer wardrobe amid state budget cuts. She admitted in memoirs to initial stage fright, but grew into the position, using it to effect change. By 1975, as Reagan left office, her initiatives had touched thousands, setting the stage for her White House years. First Lady of the United States, 1981 to 1989, the White House beckoned after Ronald's 1980 victory, making Nancy First Lady from 1981 to 1989 landslide win over Jimmy Carter, capturing 44 states amid economic recession, the Iran hostage crisis, and a desire for strong leadership, ushered in the Reagan Revolution, emphasizing supply-side economics, military buildup, and conservative values. Nancy, at 59, entered the role with experience from California but facing greater scrutiny. The inauguration on January 20th, 1981, was extravagant, with Nancy in a red Adolfo gown symbolizing optimism. Yet challenges loomed: inflation at 13%, unemployment at 7%, and Cold War tensions. Her Just Say No campaign against youth drug abuse became her hallmark, inspired by a child's question during a school visit. What do you do if someone offers you drugs? Her response, Just Say No, sparked a movement that included school assemblies, celebrity endorsements, and educational materials distributed nationwide. Drug abuse surged in the 1970s to 80s, with cocaine and marijuana use among teens doubling, fueled by cultural shifts and availability. Nancy's campaign, launched in 1982, aimed at prevention through education. The phrase originated at an Oakland elementary school visit, where a girl's query prompted her impromptu reply. It evolved into a national effort, with Nancy visiting over 250 schools, hosting White House events, and producing curricula for DARE programs. Celebrities like Michael Jackson and Mr. T endorsed it, appearing in PSAs viewed by millions. She traveled over 250,000 miles, speaking in 65 cities across 33 states and 9 countries, visiting rehab centers, hosting international summits with 30 first ladies, and even addressing the UN in 1988 to advocate for global anti-drug policies. Her itinerary was grueling. From inner-city Chicago clinics to rural Texas farms, she listened to addicts' stories, hugged recovering teens, and pushed for community programs. In 1985, she convened the First Ladies Conference on Drug Abuse in Washington and Atlanta, with participants like Imelda Marcos and Raisa Gorbachev, fostering diplomacy through shared concern. Her 1988 UN speech, the first by a First Lady to the General Assembly, called for international cooperation against cartels. Behind the scenes, Nancy collaborated with celebrities for PSAs like one with Clint Eastwood saying, "Make my day, say no to drugs," and pushed for education over punishment, though the campaign's simplicity drew later criticism for not addressing underlying issues like poverty, leading to accusations of being out of touch with systemic causes. A harrowing event in 1981 reshaped her. An assassin's bullet nearly killed Ronald during an attempt by John Hinckley Jr., who was obsessed with actress Jodie Foster. On March 30th, 1981, outside the Washington Hilton, Hinckley fired 6 shots, hitting Reagan in the lung. Nancy at the White House rushed to George Washington University Hospital, arriving disheveled and frantic. In the chaos, she held Ronald's hand as doctors operated, whispering, "Honey, I forgot to duck," echoing his quip. Later, in an archived interview, she revealed how she'd have taken the bullet herself if she could, a testament to her devotion. The incident, watched by millions on TV, boosted Reagan's approval but traumatized Nancy, leading to nightmares and hypervigilance. This trauma sparked her reliance on astrologer Joan Quigley, whose advice influenced presidential schedules. A secret born from fear, leaked in 1988, stirring controversy as it clashed with Ronald's public image. Quigley, introduced by Merv Griffin, provided charts for safe travel times. Nancy consulted her for summit dates and speeches. Revealed in Don Regan's memoir, For the Record, 1988, it sparked ridicule, the stargazing First Lady. But Nancy defended it as a coping mechanism, not policy influence. Health trials struck in 1987 with her breast cancer diagnosis. A mammogram detected a tumor, leading to a mastectomy on October 17th at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Opting for the procedure over lumpectomy, she went public, urging early detection and boosting mammography rates by 40% nationwide, sharing her story in interviews to empower women and demystify the disease, turning personal vulnerability into public service. Personal stories and emotional impact. Throughout her life, Nancy's personal stories reveal a woman of profound emotion beneath her composed exterior. In letters compiled in I Love You, Ronnie, she wrote, I love you so very much. I don't even mind that life made me wait so long to find you. The waiting only made the finding sweeter. Ronald reciprocated with tender notes like one calling her my first lady of the world, their correspondence spanning decades and offering glimpses into a deeply affectionate bond that friends like Charlton Heston described as probably the greatest love affair in the history of the American presidency. Their unbreakable connection was legendary, with Nancy often attributing her strength to Ronald, saying, my life really began when I married my husband, yet admitting the challenges of his emotional distance, rooted in his own difficult childhood. Yet family dynamics were thornier. Daughter Patty's memoir painted Nancy as controlling, leading to public feuds rooted in feelings of neglect as Nancy prioritized Ronald, with Patty recalling moments of tension during teenage years when her activism clashed with her parents' conservatism. They reconciled before Nancy's passing, with Patty reflecting, I tried her patience and she intimidated me, and later writing letters in Dear Mom and Dad to process their complex relationship, acknowledging Nancy's anxieties that were sometimes projected onto her children. A rarely discussed incident. During Ronald's governorship, Nancy quietly helped a young woman facing an unplanned pregnancy, arranging support through discreet channels, an act of compassion that humanized her beyond the polished image, drawing from her own understanding of vulnerability. Eyewitness accounts from aides describe her weeping alone after tough days, masking vulnerability with steely resolve. She once confided to a friend, I've always been the worrier for both of us, highlighting her role as emotional anchor. These glimpses show a woman who battled inner demons, abandonment from childhood, fear of loss, while projecting grace, her contradictions adding depth to her humanity, as she navigated the pull between fierce devotion to her husband and the strains it placed on her children. Controversies and historical debates. Controversies swirled around Nancy, painting her as complex and divisive. Early on, her love for designer gowns borrowed from names like Adolfo and Galanos, and redecorating the White House with $200,000 in donations amid the 1981 recession drew ire, labeling her out of touch and earning the nickname Queen Nancy, with critics accusing her of insensitivity during economic hardship. Media critiqued her adoring gaze at Ronald as both endearing and manipulative, suggesting she wielded undue influence by advising on staff decisions and policy, often clashing with aides like Chief of Staff Ronald Reagan, whom she forced out in a power struggle to protect her husband's image. Her astrology consultations, post-assassination attempt, fueled debates about rationality in the Oval Office, revealed in Chief of Staff Don Reagan's 1988 memoir. It sparked outrage, though Nancy defended it as a coping mechanism for her anxiety, born from the terror of nearly losing Ronald. The Just Say No campaign faced backlash for oversimplifying addiction, ignoring root causes like poverty, and contributing to the war on drugs punitive approach, which disproportionately affected minorities and led to mass incarceration, with some arguing it exacerbated rather than solved the crisis. Historians debate her influence on AIDS policy, the Reagan's slow response. Ronald didn't publicly address it until 1987, drew sharp criticism from LGBTQ+ communities, who felt ignored amid the epidemic's toll of over 20,000 deaths by then. Though Nancy privately urged faster action, pushing for research and even inviting affected families to the White House, showing nuance in her stance as she battled conservative elements in the administration. Biographies like Kitty Kelly's controversial Nancy Reagan, The Unauthorized Biography, 1991, Alleged Affairs, including with Frank Sinatra and manipulation, claims fiercely denied by supporters as tabloid smears, fueled by anonymous sources, portraying her as scheming rather than supportive. These debates highlight her contradictions: a fierce protector who could seem cold, a traditionalist who pushed boundaries like stem cell advocacy later on. Yet Gallup polls consistently ranked her among the most admired women, suggesting her warmth pierced through the noise. Opposing views persist. Some see her as a power behind the throne enabler of conservative policies that delayed progress on social issues. Others as a compassionate advocate evolving with time, particularly in her efforts to humanize the presidency. Later years and legacy, 1989 to 2016. Post-White House, Nancy founded the Nancy Reagan Foundation to continue anti-drug work, merging it with the Best Foundation in 1994 to create after-school programs teaching life skills, expanding to include mentorship and prevention strategies that reached thousands of youth. After Ronald's 1994 Alzheimer's announcement, she became his devoted caregiver until his 2004 death, describing it as the long goodbye in heartfelt interviews, where she managed his daily care at their Bel Air home, shielding him from public view to preserve his dignity. A personal anecdote: in his final years, Nancy read to him daily from his own letters, rekindling memories amid the disease's cruelty, a tender ritual that helped her cope with the emotional toll. She advocated for stem cell research, lobbying President George W. Bush in 2001 despite Republican opposition, influencing limited federal funding, and drawing criticism from anti-abortion groups, demonstrating her willingness to cross party lines for causes born from personal pain. Health declines marked her later years. Multiple falls led to broken bones, including a hip fracture in 2008, limiting her mobility and leading to increased reliance on aids, though she remained active in preserving Ronald's legacy through events at his presidential library. She oversaw Ronald's library in Simi Valley, preserving his legacy until her death from congestive heart failure on March 6, 2016, at age 94. Nancy's legacy endures in ways both grand and intimate. Her anti-drug efforts, though debated, raised awareness and inspired programs like DARE, influencing generations to confront substance abuse through education and community involvement. The Foster Grandparents Initiative she championed now connects thousands, fostering intergenerational bonds that heal communities by providing companionship and support. Politically, she exemplified the power of spousal influence, advising Ronald on personnel and policy, helping navigate the Cold War's end through her encouragement of arms control talks with the Soviets. Culturally, she redefined the First Lady role, not just hostess, but advocate and guardian, blending elegance with activism in a way that inspired future First Ladies. Today, amid ongoing battles with addiction and Alzheimer's, her stem cell advocacy reminds us of progress born from personal loss. It contributed to expanded research funding, potentially saving lives and highlighting the human cost of disease. We learn from her the value of unwavering loyalty, the courage to evolve views, and the quiet strength in vulnerability. In a divided world, her story urges us to see beyond facades, embracing life's fragile beauty and the contradictions that make us human. In the end, Nancy Reagan's journey from a lonely child in Queens to a global icon teaches that love, in its deepest form, can move mountains. She once said, "Our relationship is very special. We were very much in love and still are." That enduring bond, forged through trials like political scandals, health crises, and family reconciliations, leaves us pondering our own connections and the legacies we build. Resting beside Ronald at his presidential library, she reminds us, true strength lies in the heart, and some stories like hers never truly end.